On April 10th, the Washington Post printed an exclusive report based on leaked documents about the Russia-Ukraine war. And the headline and the subheadline give a good idea of what the substance of these leaks were. The U.S. doubts Ukraine counteroffensive will yield big gains, leaked document says. It's a marked departure from the Biden administration's public pronouncements about the vitality of Ukraine's army and is likely to embolden critics calling for negotiations to end the war. So the article goes on to detail, and there have been subsequent reports about this since the documents became available for other outlets to sort of read through, what basically we all knew from the outset, which is that at best, from Ukraine's point of view, this war is going to be fought to a stalemate, and that prolonging the fighting only prolongs the fighting for no other reason but to prolong the fighting, to maintain war for war's sake, which is of benefit to no one except the war profiteers here in this nation. And so the findings of these documents, as Washington Post writes, embolden the critics calling for negotiations to end the war. It's funny how, things are sort of fast-tracked here. I feel like we are on an accelerated timeline, which is a good sign, actually, because the Iraq war took years for people to actually come around to the idea that this was a monumental and tragic waste of time, money, blood, and resources. Whereas now I feel like polling for funding this war is sliding at a faster rate than that did. But as we've mentioned before, the anti-war voices are almost always right. They're almost always proven right in the end, because war is hell. War benefits no one but those who profit directly off of it. And that's more or less what these documents reveal. So Washington Post gets a big scoop. They figure, all right, the press is back. This is what it's all about, right? Daniel Ellsberg, Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks. We're back to doing our job. We're back to holding power to account. Well, not exactly. All right. Some folks at an outlet a little further north got a little penis envy at the Washington Post for breaking this story. So they say, well, we'll one-up you.
We're still pissed about Watergate.
Right, exactly. Still pissed about Watergate, right? Still holding a grudge. They got us again. God damn it, right? We'll do you one better. We're not going to report necessarily so thoroughly on the findings. No. We are going to go after and track down and expose and bring to justice who? The people who are lying about the Ukraine war? No. We're going to bring the leaker to justice. So the New York Times writes this whole piece, the airmen who gave gamers a real taste of war. A group liked online war games, but then Jack Teixeira, a 21-year-old National Guard airman, began showing members classified documents, they say. So they interviewed a bunch of his peers in this chat space, right? And look at the video that they post under this. Video of Jack Teixeira being arrested. Now, this was a very, very long and detailed article about how they found this out and who they talked to, all of his different contacts and things like that. But the real coup de grace, the real sort of cherry on top, is something that Russell saw. I didn't see, even though we both share a New York Times subscription. So I'm sure they emailed this to me and I just didn't see it. But good on Russell for finding this. They send out a newsletter email on Sunday morning bragging about how they tracked down the leaker. So here's the headline. Good morning. Sunday morning. Good morning. How did the Times identify the suspect at the center of the Pentagon leak before the authorities announced his name? Again, just talk about brown
took
nosing
a little victory lap
thing.
here.
Yeah, taking a victory lap here. How did we do it? They write a whole detailed article about how they did it. They explained everything. They sort of rehashed a lot of what was in that first article. But here's the end. Just imagine this. Imagine a news organization. Once again, your job, you are the fourth estate. Your job is to expose the powerful, not to expose the people exposing the powerful. Look at the last two paragraphs of this. Tell me this isn't one of the wildest fucking things you've ever seen. Greenwald, a media expert, guy who's been commenting on this, says he's never really seen anything quite like this. Never seen anything this far gone.
Nor have I. Nor
Look
have
at
I.
this.
This is definitely a new frontier.
So this is the end of the newsletter where they're bragging about how they tracked down this 21-year-old leaker. On Thursday, Haley Willis, another member of our team, and 2 colleagues arrived before dawn at the Teixeira home. So they tracked him down through all of this, sort of interviews with all the people that he was interacting with online. Tracked him down. We arrived before dawn at his house in North Dighton, Massachusetts. Quote, "We saw who we believe might have been Jack driving into the driveway," she said. "He saw us. We saw him, and his car froze for a second in the driveway. They approached the house. Jack's stepfather, Thomas Dufault, a retired Air Force Master Sergeant, was there. Haley asked him if she could speak to Jack. He's not going to communicate with anybody except a lawyer at this point," the stepfather said. Quote, "Soon a plane circled overhead. It was clear the authorities were already onto him." Back in New York, we published our investigation. Later that morning, a SWAT team arrived at the house in Massachusetts. Wow. So here you have the New York Times bragging that they basically snitched on a whistleblower, on a leaker. It's just extraordinary.
You know what? I'm going to give our people who don't have a subscription to Taibbi a treat, because this literally dropped as we were doing this segment. Taibbi is back from vacation. I will just read a little bit of his commentary on this. "It's an awful look for the press. This isn't tracking down a serial killer or exposing Enron's fraud. The alleged crime here is releasing true information that belongs to the American public and is secret only by official designation. At most, a newspaper might decide not to publish such information, but to help jail the leaker? It's nuts. Reporters are supposed to be interested in everything and listen to information without judgment like doctors. Yet the whole industry is working itself into a moral frenzy because a bunch of overgrown Minecraft enthusiasts were privately passing around a few truths like a joint." So that's a little taste of Taibbi's take.
Yeah, just incredible. What can you say? You talk about state media, right? We talk about totalitarian regimes that have their own media, right? China, Russia, there's
Watch it. God damn it. Now we got we're gonna have these China apologists in the comment section now.
Well, I'm speaking up for China.
You can't say China. China. If you say it like that, maybe they won't bother us. China.
Well, look, they got a point in this situation. I mean, if this isn't state media, if this isn't what you would see in any police state, what is?
All right. Look, I'll make peace with these fellows by giving them a story. So, I used to drive a horse and carriage, and one of the funniest guys I ever worked with was a guy. We had these mob kind of nicknames. Don't come after me for being on PC. We called him Chinese Frank. It was from Shanghai. And so there was this story years ago. It was during the Bush administration, I think, where the Chinese forced down an American plane or something. And remember, I was much more shit-livy back then. And so all the news reporting was about Chinese state media and Chinese propaganda and the way they misreport things. So I said to Chinese Frank, I said, so do the people in China know that the news that they get is fake and it's state controlled? And with his great comic timing, he just stopped and, "Oh, yes, some of them. Let me ask you something. Do the people in America know that their press is controlled by your government?" And I was like, as shit-livy as I was then, I was like, all right, touche. Like, I knew he was right. So yeah, man, I mean, you get there from two different routes, basically. The Chinese route is direct, ostensible, state-run media. It's government control over the media, ostensibly. It's not a question. They don't pretend that the media is independent. That's understood. In some ways, what we have is more insidious, because the premise is that our media is free, our media is independent, but it isn't. And what's that great quote you're always pulling out?
Yeah, so the quote is from George Carlin. He was on a Bill Maher panel, and somebody accused him of being a conspiracy theorist. And he said, you don't need a conspiracy when interests converge. In other words, you don't need a formal conspiracy when everyone in a space understands that they share the same goals and they know how to get there, and everybody does their part. There doesn't have to be a back room. There doesn't have to be any deals made. They all know the deal, and they go and they do it. Right.
And the people who argue against this, they always think it's a mic drop when they're, well, what do you think? They all get together in a room?
Right.
No, they don't have to.
Right. There's a lineup in baseball. Right. They don't have a team huddle between at bats. One guy gets to second base. The guy who's up knows it's his job to either score him or at least get him over to third base, hit a ground ball to the right side. He knows what to do. They don't have to call a meeting to say, okay, now here's what you're going to do.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. They're on a baseball team.
They're all on the same team. They're all pulling in the same direction. They all have the same assumptions. And a lot of that goes back to the stuff that, Taibbi writes about, that it used to be a working class job being a reporter. So it attracted a lot of ornery, kind of obnoxious guys. I mean, you could definitely make the argument that a guy like me and a guy like Keaton, if this were 50 years ago, we'd be reporters. We would have been reporters, right? Like this, we have that impulse. We have that, what he describes as back then, the people who wanted to be reporters,
exactly.
They were gadflies. They like to piss people off.
And we couldn't do this 50 years ago. So this outlet wouldn't have been an option. So yeah, we would have gone into that.
Right. And that would have been an option because they wouldn't have been like, well, hang on, you didn't go to Yale. And once that shifted, once it became hiring people who on that basis, on their elite credentials, that changed the whole news business, because now you've got reporters whose class interests and class perspective are aligned with the people that they're supposed to be reporting on. Going through New Orleans recently, I've traveled a lot over the last year, and a common denominator, you go to rich liberal neighborhoods, they got the Ukraine flag flying. You go outside of those areas, you don't see that shit, man. When I went to the black parts of New Orleans, which is most of New Orleans, you didn't see no motherfucking Ukraine flag, man. When you went into the heavily gentrified neighborhoods, that's when you saw those Ukraine flags. That's when you saw those stencils on the sidewalks. You didn't see that shit in the black neighborhoods. You didn't see that in neighborhoods where people have real problems. You saw that in the rich neighborhoods. So, this is one of the things I said when I was arguing with the shit libs today. The people who are Democrats today, they're the traditional Republicans, professional class people, and they have the perspective that Republicans always had, very pro-war, patriotic, behind the institutions, but because these are people for whom the system is working. It's working. So they're not going to question it. They are the kind of Republicans that the famous Goldwater ad was aimed at for Johnson, anti-Goldwater, where it was a button-down Republican, kind of, clean-cut professional. I'm a Republican, but I'm just not comfortable with Goldwater. That's your classic Rockefeller Republican, man. Those are the Democrats now.
Right. And didn't you mention that there was a press conference? I didn't see this video, but there was a press conference where all these press people were asking, hey, how are we going to prevent leaks like this from happening again?
Yeah. So I watched it because I had heard about it. I had heard because a lot of people.
Now, who was that? Who were they asking?
They're asking, they got somebody, it wasn't Jean-Pierre. They got somebody, I think, from the intelligence services to answer these questions.
Okay. So it was a government person.
It was a government person. It was a guy. Guy. I'm not sure who he was.
One of these Jake Sullivan types.
One of these Jake Sullivan types. You got it. And yeah, all the questions they were asking him were, so is the government going to review their qualifications for security clearance now? So now that this has happened, what are we going to say to our Ukrainian partners about securing intelligence? How are we going to deal with that? What if we're getting hacked? Because at this point they didn't know who had done it.
How are we going to make our jobs harder? How are we going to undermine our function? Right.
They work for the government at this point. They are not
they work
not
for the government.
Independent media. They work for the government just like anybody working for a state media.
Exactly. You don't like my music, you've been commenting a bit, which, that's your right and it's fine, corporations are not the state. Well, basically now they are. That's the point, is that no, this is not officially state media, but when they cozy up to the state in this way and are not a thorn in their side as they are supposed to be, but rather, this isn't even laptop. They were acting as agents of the state here. They were seeking out this guy in order to turn him over and get him locked up. This poor kid's probably going to face life in prison now, assuming that he's actually the guy. And this is an interesting video we want to play here because friend of the show, Sabby Sabs, who was very gracious in hosting us last week, we're going to be returning the favor and hosting her this Sunday, April 23rd. She comes from a military family, which she talks about quite a bit. And she had a kind of interesting theory about this. She says, hey, wait a minute. So you're telling me that a 21-year-old kid of relatively low rank had access to this info? You're telling me he's really the guy and he's not the fall guy? He's not the patsy? He's not the scapegoat? Let's hear what she has to say about this. I thought this was pretty interesting.
Spidey senses are going off about this particular event. You guys know I came from a military family. I talk about this often on the show. I'm very familiar with how the branches of the military work and the ranking system, right? But somebody please explain to me how a 21-year-old soldier of the National Guard was able to obtain top secret Pentagon documents. All of you need to ask this question, okay? He wasn't even a lieutenant. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't a colonel. He is a low-ranking soldier. So how does a low-ranking soldier get access to that type of information? Am I really supposed to believe this? Let me tell you what I think is going on. I think he could be a scapegoat. I think that someone else higher up is actually the person who obtained that information. You cannot sit up here and tell me that someone that is at that low of a rank in the National Guard, they don't even operate Monday through Friday. So let's just put them to the side, okay? They were able to obtain that level of secrecy. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. Something is fishy here about this entire story.
She would know better than me, obviously. I'm from no military family myself. I come from a long line of draft dodgers here in the name. But yeah, no, look, she's right. It doesn't really make that much sense. Obviously it's speculation. I'm sure she would concede that herself, but I think it's worth asking. How does it happen?
It's an interesting point. The only reason I would give it any credence is sometimes when you dig into how our government works, some of the inefficiency is terrifying. I remember it was a few years ago, somebody wrote an article about what's really going on in our nuclear silos, like just these burnt out basket case isolated soldiers doing drugs and jello shots, like sitting there with the, waiting to turn the key. So who knows? But look, that's a legit question. Why would they give like a low-level National Guard, not even regular military, like National Guard person, that kind of access? The only way I would say is maybe they, gave the person some kind of job with the computers. it does seem a little bit like you have a lot of graybeards running the military who don't quite understand the technology, who are like, yeah, let these kids fix it. That's the only way I could see maybe something like that happening. Like if you ever go to the 9/11 museum, one of the things that strikes you in the Pentagon display is this is as late as 2001, and they're still working with Rolodexes and dial-up phones. Like that's on display. Some of the stuff they pulled out of there. It's all like technology from the 60s.
Yep. I've seen that. I've been there a few times with some different tour groups. But yeah, no, look, I mean, that is definitely a good question, and there will be more to this story. Obviously, there's more coming out, but just on a very fundamental level, the idea that, the most esteemed, two of the most esteemed sort of papers of record in the country would be coordinating in order to bust a whistleblower, bust a leaker, when the whole function of media is to get your hands on information, ideally, when possible, information that the government doesn't necessarily want you to know. Isn't that what the press is about? I mean, if they didn't look for shit the government didn't want us to know, then what would we need the press for? We would just have whoever the White House press person, they come out, they tell us what's going on, and that's it. What do you even need newspapers for? What do you need websites for? Right? I mean, this is just very, very basic. This is 101 stuff. And here we send out a good morning, happy Sunday, everybody. We're going to tell you how we nailed the whistleblower.
Let us tell you how we cornered.
We're talking to our lawyer. The choppers were overhead. A day later, nailed them. Just incredible.
Let's tell you how we captured Montague the fireman.
Yeah, right.
This is where we, as independent media, we have a mission, man. We gotta break these organizations, and it might sound very David and Goliath, but maybe we have to think outside the box. Maybe we have to look at the fact that Sabby's in Boston, and Nick is in Kansas City, and CJ is in LA. Maybe we need to start to work together as news bureaus, and I'm in New York, and news gather where we are, right? Like maybe we need to start to try to be coordinated citizen journalists so that we're not so dependent on the resources that these media have. Like maybe we contact with people, because we are the top 100 political podcast in Ireland. We can get overseas reporting. We got people in India, right? Maybe we have to think outside the box as independent media. Maybe there are ways we can create a network, a literal network, by drawing on our connections around the world, because a lot of shows like ours, we're worldwide, man. I mean, a lot of people see this in a lot of different places. We have to get creative to try to figure out ways that we can do our own news gathering.
Please clap.